hear already, my name is Mariota and I work here at MyTutor. We're so happy to have all of you here today. We've set up this webinar because we know that from the past couple of years, obviously exams have not happened as much as they used to, but they were cancelled 2 years in a row. I know a lot of students have had school assessments, but it's not been quite the same as your usual GCSE or A-level exams that you would have done otherwise, especially if you've got to A-levels without having sat a real national exam. You might be feeling a bit nervous about what's involved in revision and exam technique. So luckily we have Matthew here today, who's one of the most experienced tutors on the whole MyTutor platform. So of about 15,000 tutors, I think you're in the sort of top 10 most taught lessons. And Matthew is a maths tutor and he's currently studying for a master's in, and what's the actual name of your master's, Matthew, so I don't say it wrong?
If we want the really full title,
yeah.
It is medical statistics with specialization in genetic epidemiology.
Wow, very clever sounding, if you ask me. But Matthew is an expert tutor and an expert exam technique tutor as well. Just before we start as well, if you want to ask any questions for Matthew that come into your mind, we've got, there's a little Q&A button if you click at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you ask questions there throughout the talk, then we will try our best to answer all of them in the last 20 minutes of this talk. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Matthew to share his expertise.
Thank you very much, and I'll extend my welcome to you all. The first thing I'll do is be really professional and hopefully share something that looks like some slides. If it does, then I deserve my master's already. So, as Mariota said, call me Matthew, Matt, whatever we want to go with. I am a student of medical statistics. I'm at the University of Leicester at the minute. I have undergrad in maths and stats, so my background is very much in the subjects that I teach. And in my spare time, I think it's fun to go and hang off the side of mountains. Apparently that's fun. I'm also heavily involved with Duke of Edinburgh's Award. If any of you alongside your qualifications are involved in that, doing that, I've been through them all, and I'm now part of the team that goes and stands in the field and waits for you while you're getting lost. The first thing I will do before I get into any content is I will offer you an apology. Whoever decides these things gave it this week for me to get a cold. So if my nose is a little bit annoying, I can only apologize and tell you it's 10 times worse for me. So without further ado, let's get on with some exam prep. So,
Matthew, just before we start, did you want to launch the polls to ask how everyone's feeling, or do you want to do that a bit later?
Let's go for it now.
Okay, cool.
That is a good shout.
I want to interrupt. Okay, cool. So we've just got a little, so this question, so perhaps just the students here answer, have you sat a formally invigilated exam in the last 2 years? I think, if parents answer, they might skew the results, so. We'll just give you about 10 more seconds to answer this. Great. For those of you who are just joining, we're just quickly doing a couple of polls to see who's done an exam in the past couple of years, and then how everyone's feeling about exams as well. So just drop your answer here. Okay, I'll end it there. So Matthew, you can see that 60% of the students here have not done an exam in the past couple of years.
Hey.
Oh, sorry, I can share the results. Sorry, there you go. So 40,
Right.
60. And then we've got one more, don't we?
Yes, we do.
There we go. So which of the following best describes your revision at the moment? I've started revising and it's going really well. I've done a little bit, but I'm not really getting anywhere. Or I know what to revise, but I'm struggling with how to get started. And I'm completely lost with revision. And we'll just give you about 30 seconds to answer this one as well. It's looking quite mixed so far. Okay, cool, I'll end it there. So yeah, we can see it's looking very mixed. Most people, biggest proportion of people saying, I don't know what to revise and I'm struggling with how to get started.
Okay, very fair. And as you can see, so hopefully this gives you a little bit of confidence that you are not, any of you, whichever category you're in, you're not the only ones in that category. So hopefully that's brought my screen back. So a little bit of a plan for today. As Mariota said, please do ask questions. If I see them as I go along, and I can kind of link them in, I'll answer them as we go along. If I don't answer your question straight away, please don't be offended. We'll have plenty of time left for that at the end. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of what you might be worried about, what students generally worry about with an exam, what you might want to revise, how you might want to revise it, how I recommend some of my students, and what they've found helpful in the past, emphasizing that revision in itself doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to take over your life, right down to on the day. I have just noted that in the chat, someone has asked whether this is being recorded. Yes, it is being recorded. You will get the link sent to you, I believe, afterwards. I'm not important enough to be doing that sort of thing. Anything that you don't want put in the chat, or anything you don't want to be seen in the chat, then you can restrict it to the host and panelist chat rather than the anyone and everyone. Hopefully that helps. Okay, fantastic. So I'm a statistician, as I've already said, so the natural thing for me to do was gather a little bit of data. So these are some of the things, some of the words that have come from my students, my tutees, about what kind of thing building up to an exam they are concerned about. And I want to really reiterate that this is a normal thing. You know, exams are stressful for students. They're particularly for the 60% of you that haven't done exams already. You don't necessarily know what to expect. Okay. This happens at different times. So the very word of an exam for some people is the trigger. For others, it might be a week before, it might be a night before. For me, it tends to be kind of 3 o'clock in the morning on the day of the exam that I think, that's what exam nerves are. I remember those. And it sort of stops me from getting back to sleep, which is not very nice, but there we go. Sometimes, and this is very common in all parts of life, that those of you who have done an exam before, you may have experienced that maybe something hasn't gone too well, maybe you didn't get the grade that you wanted. That doesn't mean that's what the next exam is going to be like. Every exam is different, every paper is different. We are all different. Different things will happen with different outcomes. Okay. An exam isn't trying to catch you out. So we're talking a little bit about what an exam is, what it contains, but it is not there to catch you out. But don't worry if you aren't worried. Okay. If you're not worried, that's great. But for those of you who are, what should we do? And how should we go about it? So I've started with a very basic timetable. This is what my week looks like. I expect it's what quite a lot of other people's week look like. And this is the initial scary thought. How do we go about dealing with this? Well, I've come up with a little bit of a plan. Breaking down your week, chunks throughout, is going to make it so much easier. But I want to reiterate that your whole life doesn't have to revolve around revision. So for me, sports and music were the other way around on weekends. Don't get rid of them. Okay, so lots of subjects, lots of things to break down. Just an example, but I've started with this because this is the first step to getting revision done, is having a bit of a plan in mind. So some people might have, it'll be half term next week. And then, so start of November, mocks come up. Are you revising now for your mocks, or are you revising for real things? Regardless of what it is, starting now is the best time to start. Give yourself that time. Give yourself time to go away from it, come back to things, have a panic, get over it, and get back on track. As I've already said, and as I will keep saying, work through small chunks. Cramming is really not pleasant. I would be interested, actually, just by way of yes or no in the chat. Those of you, particularly on A levels, have you ever crammed for an exam before? Yeah, a lot of people saying yes. Admittedly, I am also one of those people. In my A level and my undergraduate days, I had quite a few where, yeah, I felt like I had to stay up the night before. Okay, so does cramming actually get us anywhere? Well, in terms of a short-term memory, it might get you through one exam. But we have mock exams now. Why not use the revision that you're doing now to benefit you further down the line? I say this last point with a little bit of a caveat. Try to avoid working late at night unless that's what works for you. Some people are really counterproductive during the day. Some people aren't morning people, particularly for those of you doing A levels or thinking about getting into undergraduate years. Your day is slightly more reliant on you to structure it. If you don't work well at 6:30 in the morning, don't revise at 6:30 in the morning. But whatever you do, doing something is doing better than nothing. So even if you feel like you can only do half an hour, do it. So one of my favorite methods, or my absolute favorite method, I have no attention span at all. I have to hold a pen whilst I'm talking, so this will be going under the desk. I can't concentrate for long periods of time. So for those of you who've come across it before, Pomodoro technique, absolutely fantastic for breaking down large, arduous tasks into much smaller chunks. So you take a topic. Let's say you're working on science. Let's be a bit more specific, biology. 25 minutes, you'll work on one topic. That might be something in cells, so the structure of a cell. you take a 5-minute break, you come back to it, you look at, if you looked at animal cells, you come back and look at plant cells. You do another 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, you come back, you look at the functions of those things within the cells. Do that once or twice more, and then within 2 hours, you've done the whole of a chapter, but you're not absolutely knackered from it because you've managed to have little breaks and you've kept yourself focused. Once you've done that 3 or 4 times, a couple of hours is a good amount of time revising. There's a lot of questions, and it's one of the most common things I get asked by my tutees. It's one of the most common questions that teachers get asked when mocks or exams are coming up. How long should you revise for? Now, that is a completely subjective question. It's entirely down to the person. But if you do 2 hours of revision and you've managed to do a chapter, you can judge that for yourself that that's a good length of time. That's a healthy chunk of revision. Flashcards. Okay, so Pomodoro technique, I've talked about breaking down a subject. What are you actually going to do to learn that subject? So for notes, quotes, formulae, prompts, start getting your content down, start early. But if you are going to make them, use them. Don't make them the night before. This is a classic thing. I've done it myself. You make them the night before, which means you've written the content down once. You haven't really taken it in because you were busy looking at the words. And then all of a sudden you haven't got time to use them, but you've taken up that time by writing them out. And they take a lot longer to prepare than anyone expects. They just take forever. They're quite satisfying to make sometimes, but they take a hell of a long time to do. So work with other people, test one another. Take one topic for one person, another topic for another. With between 4 or 5 friends, you've got a whole module's worth of content, and you can actually get on and start using them. Now, as well as physical flashcards, there are quite a few websites, Quizlet, places like MathsWatch, Tutor to You for economics and business. Others will come into my head just at the most inconvenient of moments, probably about 8 o'clock tonight. Look for them, search for them, and use resources that are already there. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of where you can be looking to help yourself. But if you're looking at a topic and you've got a list of vocabulary, maybe languages, and there's a list of vocabulary there, you don't have to spend the time writing it out. It's just as well to use them. So here's a little demo of a flashcard. Anyone who's done the GCSE in maths will have been haunted by this thing and have no clue on why we might ever use it in life. So y equals mx plus c. I'm saying what it is. I'm giving myself the key piece of information, a couple of clues, got a little bit of color on there, admittedly not very much because I'm quite dull. And I've stuck just notes and prompts, reminders. So you'll start with using this, attempting a couple of questions, and then over time, you can take it away. You can write ones with less on. Just because it only has a few words or phrases on doesn't mean it isn't a handy prompt. And actually, for long-term memory, this is so much better than having a massive chunky paragraph. So, questions. This is an interesting point for me, perhaps for Mariota, and any parents out there, that when I asked my tutees what revision kind of meant to them and what they found works, almost none of my GCSE students said past paper questions, and almost all of my A-level students did say past paper questions. And one of the year 11s said, but actually, I heard from a sixth form student that you should do it all by past papers. There's this just massive difference. You're doing mock exams because you're preparing for what the real things are going to be like. You haven't seen an exam paper before. In life, we generally have trial runs at things. There's a terribly cringy phrase, practice makes perfect. Practice by doing what's actually going to come up. This is the best chance you can give yourself. If you know what's going to come up, you've already practiced it, then you are setting yourself up for the best chance of success. So what are you going to revise? What are you going to pick out? Well, it's worth noting that for this year's exams, so anyone who's sitting a formally invigilated exam in summer of 2022, about February, off the top of my head, but I would have to check that, you'll be told by your subject teachers what topics are going to come up on the exam. It's a mitigation for having studied the whole of your GCSEs or your A-levels through a pandemic, that you will be told what's coming up. That's all very well and good, but you still need to stay on top of those. So finding what questions have come up in the past. How is a question going to be asked? Look for different prompts. So knowing what different words mean: explore, describe, explain, prove, show, which takes us on to what's it really asking. When you're attempting a past paper question, what is it actually asking you to do? You don't want to write one line if it's asking you for a paragraph. So try different command words, understand what they mean. And because you've got the time, and as part of one of your 25-minute Pomodoros, make yourself a plan. Go back to so have a look at the question, what topic's it on, what themes, what poem from your anthology booklets are you going to be tested on? And go back and look at it and make a plan. But make that plan in something that is very cryptic. Don't start trying to write sentences. Don't start formulating things. I'll leave that thought whilst I rescue my throat. I've been intending to do that for the last 5 minutes and haven't got there. So with this plan then, once you've made it, study it. This can be over 2 minutes, it can be over 20 minutes, or you can leave it till the next day, depending on how you've planned your revision. But with that plan, attempt the question in full. Try timing yourself, but don't rely wholly on timing it. So, especially to start with, you will not be as fast as maybe you want to be in the actual exam. A minute a mark, roughly, certainly what it is in maths and sciences, that you might not be answering it at a minute a mark. That's fine. Make a note of where that time comes to. So if it's an 8-minute question, make a note when you get to 8 minutes. See where you finish off. And then over time, you can see your progress and say, well, actually, I've gone from writing in 12 minutes down to writing in 7.5 minutes. And reward yourself on that. Don't feel like revision has to be just arduous and the only goal is your exam. Be proud of yourself. Revision's hard. It takes a lot out of you. It takes a big chunk of your time. So, reward yourself. And if you get stuck on things, go back to your plan, go back to your notes, go back to one of the other strategies. So your flashcards or go back to some of the help sources, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. One of my biggest bugbears is highlighting. So if anyone feels targeted by this, I don't want to say good, but yeah. Is it particularly productive? I can't even read that properly, and I wrote it. So if you're going to use highlighters, they can be fantastic. But don't highlight every word. Don't go as far as highlighting page numbers, which I've seen before, because you won't remember them. And also ask yourself, is this really a helpful piece of text? Is it a helpful note? So if this was a flashcard, I would say probably not. I'd much rather start with a title of marketing mix, have my 5 Ps down the side, and a little comment on each of them, keyword or phrase, because you can put words like is, which, could, because, as, at into a sentence when you come to practice a question. We've said revision is hard. Quite a few of you are saying you don't know where to start. Mix things up. Variety is the spice of life, or whatever wise people say. I'm not one of them. But don't spend all your time doing full exam papers in 90 minutes because that's what's going to come up. Yeah, sure, go for it. Use your optimal working time to try some exam questions, but don't be doing paper after paper after paper. Mix things up. Spend some time with other people. Be creative, make a poster. Even if you can't draw, I can't draw, but I'll still get big poster paper out at the start of revision and at the end of a long day. And I'll start making all sorts of notes about clinical trials and epidemiology. And it just gives me a little bit of a break from really intense study. So quite a jazzy graphic on the right-hand side. Thanks to MyTutor and her team for sharing that. It will be available somewhere, I'm sure, possibly on somewhere in the Instagram feed, shameless plug. So you've got 5 minutes in your Pomodoro time, or your Pomodoro break rather. You also have slightly longer breaks. You might have half an hour, you might have an hour, you might have 2 or 3 hours off. So what are you going to do in that time? Make sure you're working in a tidy space. If you've got, let's say you've been doing flashcards and you've got loads of notes around you, so you're in this sea of paper, organize it, tidy things up, file stuff, shred stuff, rip pieces of paper that you don't need up anymore. That's always quite satisfying. Go and have a chat with someone. So you've had some nice quiet time, go and do the opposite. This is a big one for me. I really don't like being attached to a desk. So I go outside. A little bit difficult in the middle of Leicester, but doable. Make things doable. Find alternatives. Buy a banana tree and turn it into your own paradise. Make sure you're hydrated. Make sure you've got enough to eat. In your slightly longer breaks, go for a run, go for a walk, cycle, play football, rugby, whatever. But even in the short breaks, like there's stretches, 5-minute Mamma Mia workouts. They're always a fun one. There's some fantastic ones of those on YouTube. I recommend them fully. And that's probably not what you expected to come for today. Or do something creative. If you've been doing dry past paper questions, be creative. And this is by no means a definitive list. These are some of the things I like to do. So you are all a like-minded group of students, parents. share ideas with one another of what you like to do and what you've done in the past, but be respectful of one another in the chat, obviously. I've already said that I really have quite a low concentration span. So Pomodoro technique, brilliant, chunks things down. But even in that 25 minutes, minds can wander, something comes up, a song comes into your head. Don't die for your phone. And one way to get around that, if you do have a smartphone or tablet, there's an app called Forest. I thoroughly recommend it. You get to grow a nice little virtual garden. It's brilliant. It's free unless you want to buy really, really fancy trees, which are totally unnecessary. I wish they'd sponsor me. I would get so much from the amount of plugs I do on it. It is brilliant. Use it. You can set your amount of time. You grow your nice forest. If you do think of something, jot down your thoughts, make a note of it, have a piece of paper with you, come back to it afterwards. If you're still struggling on that, maybe now is not the time to do a past paper. Go onto YouTube, find a topic video and make a flashcard. Make a poster, whatever it may be. And if you've done 4 or 5 Pomodoro 25 minutes, go and do something that you want to do. So when you're revising, all of the things I've said rely on having knowledge. I don't expect you to remember everything straight away. So where are you going to get that help from? It sounds so ridiculous, but teachers. So teachers and help are such a vastly underused resource. They're the ones that know your education, or you and them, between the two of you, have the best picture of your education. Use them. Teachers want to be asked questions. I want my tutees to ask me questions. I love it when they do. I love talking through stuff. So ask teachers. Get them to re-explain things. They are going to know how you've learned stuff. They might even know what's going to be on the test. I don't think we had anyone at undergraduate. I apologize if we do. But if A-level students, IB students, if you're doing a degree next year or whenever, your lecturers are the ones that have written the exam. So definitely go and ask them for help. Go and use their office hours. But if that's not your cup of tea, then use textbooks, use the course textbook, use revision guides. You can get some great revision guides on Amazon, on the Kindle app, and actually some of them are free, which is even better. YouTube, there are hundreds, thousands of YouTube videos. Loosely speaking, this is a really general point, ones that are newer tend to be better for your syllabus, but that doesn't mean just because there is a video from 2012, but it's got 5 million views. Like, that's probably quite good then. So with the last 3, information online, there are just as many, or if not more, bad websites as there are good websites for information. So be really selective. Ask your teachers what websites work. Ask tutors. Ask Jeeves. That's the thing that used to be in the past. That makes me feel so old that I remember that. Those of you who are, and this is something that I occasionally do, TikTok. You'll get live streams where people are encouraging you to study using the Pomodoro technique. If you're easily distracted and all you want to do is scroll through your socials, click on one of them and do some work. If that's what works for you, go for it. But there are also educational TikTokers, people on Instagram. Twitter is a good source of kind of past kind of exam style question material. So do think outside the box of where you're going to get your information from. And the internet as well, online textbooks, that kind of thing. But as I've said, just be really conscious that is the information A, at the right level, and B, relevant to what's going to come up. So you've done all your revision. You started with your timetable. You have planned in loads of Pomodoro techniques to review your notes, make flashcards, use your flashcards, do past paper questions, do a full mock exam paper, realize you don't understand trigonometric identities, go back to the subject, then come back to an exam, and then it's the night before. This is not my quote. I just quite like it. Actually, you know, what happens in those 90 minutes? You've worked for it. Just show what you know. It's not there to trick you. And actually, if it doesn't go the way you want it to, it's a mock exam. It's 90 minutes. So show everything you do know. Don't get hung up on things that you wish you'd known. So you have devoted time to preparing. You started early. You're all here. So you clearly have a hunger and an admirable attitude to wanting to do well in your exams. So you know your subject, you know the material, you know the topics. If it gets to 7 o'clock the night before and you're tired, don't feel like you have to work late. Stop, do something. If you've got a French exam, watch something on Netflix that's in French, stick the subtitles on and fall asleep to it. It becomes quite a trendy thing not to have breakfast. I've noticed this on D&V expeditions more and more. People are not having breakfast. There's nothing worse than working empty stomach. So breakfast in the morning, keep your fluid levels topped up, and just focus on getting yourself calm. Once you're in there, those 90 minutes, show as much as you know. To be a little bit less philosophical and a bit more practical, pens. There is nothing more embarrassing, and I say this from unfortunate experience. There's nothing more embarrassing than being in your GCSE English language exam. It's about the longest exam that you sit at GCSE. And all of your spare pens running out of ink when you're in the middle of a long question. You can't have too many pens. Make sure they're the right color, make sure they're the right, what's the word? Composition, whatever it is. Make sure they're a ballpoint pen or a bio or something like that. Don't have splodgy fountain pens that are going to go everywhere. Plan your answers just like you did. Sip on water. If you need to 30 seconds to think, have a drink of water. You're allowed to take one in. Drink. Stay positive. If you can't do a question, move on to one you can do. If you can, write something for everything. And a big one is, once you're done, don't dwell on it. Don't go and talk to other people if you don't want to. People ask you, what did you get for this, this, and this? You don't have to answer. It's done. Okay. So that is the absolute most crash course in exams I've done. I can talk for loads and loads and loads of time, but what I'm more interested in, because that's why we're here, is over to you lovely folks. And I'm sure the chat and Q&A have been going mad whilst I've been talking.
It's been popping off. Thank you so much, Matthew, for all of that super helpful advice. I'm sure it's really valuable for everyone here. We've had loads of really great questions coming in all the way through, and we'll do our best to get through all of them, or at least like group them into themes if we can't get through them individually. So starting off, we had a first question here from Amy asking, is it easier to do a subject, so one subject in an hour, or lots of parts of different subjects in 1 hour, do you think?
So in 1 hour, I much prefer to work on one subject. Take little bits of a subject. So a couple of subtopics is good, but I wouldn't flick from biology to French to English. Set some time, use a template that's got a couple of morning sessions and an afternoon session and an evening session. And use those different hours or different couple of hours to vary what you're doing. But I do tend to avoid flicking from one thing to another because you don't particularly get into the subject very much and you might get distracted more. Hopefully that answers your question.
That sounds great. Yeah, I agree. It's even in a job, I agree with that. And we had another question here from Julie, who wants a specific number. How many hours would you say you need to revise per subject for A-level and for GCSE?
Match the number of hours. The easiest way to do it in experience is start with match the number of hours you do on that subject in school on average. So if you do 8 maths lessons a fortnight, so 4 50-minute lessons a week, try and do 3 1-hour sessions of maths. If you do 4 hours per A-level subject, try and get 4 hours in the week of economics and 4 hours of biology and whatever else. And then adapt that around how you're finding those subjects. You might want to drop some of them down a little bit. So it's very, very flexible. But if you want an exact number, go with that.
Yeah, I remember putting in about 20 times more time to my maths, which I was really bad at, than I did to my English, which I got a good grade in without a lot of revision. So I'd agree with your second point.
Yeah, mine was the other way around.
Adapting depending, yeah, if you find something tricky, you probably need to spend a bit longer on it. And yeah, so we have some more questions here. So yeah, here we have, how do you memorize content in general? And also how do you memorize content that you haven't been taught in class?
Interesting question. So memorize, different people, so you may have heard about auditory and visual and kinesthetic learners. So that's answering your question with a question is, what type of learner are you? How best do you absorb information? To memorize things, it's really repetition and being comfortable with things. Take vocabulary for a language. Give yourself little tests. Try and make your memory work little bits at a time. So our working memory, I'm not a psychologist or any kind of clinician like that, but working memory works on focusing on one thing at once. So if you're trying to read something, you can't focus on that and listening to something at once. So give your memory little tests at a time. Focus on, when I think back to doing vocab and that kind of thing, it was always look, say, cover, write, check. These methods are used in primary schools for good reason, because they help develop muscle memory of things, repetition and familiarity. As for content that you've not actually been taught in school, I sympathize with you. It's not a nice position to be in unless you're trying to teach yourself things, in which case very admirable. I can't do that. So be really comfortable and actually make sure you've got a proper understanding first before before you try and memorize things. It's not a short process, unfortunately, but you can't memorize stuff until you properly understand it. So use some resources, get lots of different explanations of it, find someone who can answer questions that you have.
I'd add that if you're able to, well, either finding an expert online who can explain it to you in a video or a YouTube video, and then if you're able to as well, a one-to-one tutorial can be helpful, because you on MyTutor you could find someone who has that exam knowledge and would be able to teach you themselves. So it's always good to ask for help if you're feeling a bit alone in a topic. Cool. So really good question here from Emma. So basically Emma is asking, what's your advice, Matthew, for if you have actually revised really well and you're pretty sure you've got everything memorized, and then you go into the exam hall and all of the knowledge you have floods out of your brain? That happened to me a lot.
Yeah, I do unfortunately get kind of blank moments. Again, chunks, small bits at a time. Start mind maps. What do you know? What can you remember? Give yourself little prompts. Don't panic is the bottom line. Go with anything you can remember. And also, I think it's important to remember that, so this is speaking as me, entirely as me in my own capacity, my personal life, that I do get quite panicky at some things. I do get, really anxious in some situations. I have to rationalize with myself that the person that is marking the exam paper, I'm never going to meet them. They don't know who I am. You're marked as it sounds terrible. You're marked as a number, not as a name, but it's done completely anonymously. You know bits, you do know things, but if you write something for a question that's a complete load of rubbish, it doesn't matter. That person is never going to hunt you down and torment you with how stupid your answer sounded, which wouldn't have sounded stupid anyway, because you've had a good shot at the question, you've turned up to the exam and you've done it. So be really realistic about it. Any tips from you, Mariota, from your experience of that?
Well, having been able to reflect after having finished university, rather than before, I heard a really good tip from another education expert who said that if you do get that kind of blind panic in an exam, that quite a good technique is called box breathing. And it's where so you're in the exam hall, panicking, all the information's gone through your brain. Try just breathing in for 5 seconds, and then you hold for 5 seconds, and then breathe out for 5 seconds again. And just do that a few times, which should calm you down. And then you should be able to find that if you have done the revision, that the information that's in your brain will start trickling back to you, because the anxiety that was just getting in the way of what is in your brain has gotten out of the way. So that's quite a handy technique as well. But yeah, I think Matthew's advice on if you don't see exams as like absolutely everything ever, and this is probably not what the advice you've come to this webinar for, but it does actually help you do better, that if you don't see doing badly in an exam is the absolute end of the world, end of your life, then you're much less likely to get really panicked and more likely to get the best possible grade that you're capable of. So it's a bit sort of ironic in that way. But it's really important to separate your self-worth from how you do in any exam. It's definitely helpful, I would say. Would you agree, Matthew? Yeah. Let's see. So we've got a few more questions in our last few minutes here. Yeah, really good question from Cardia here. How do I take out time to do revision at home and not get distracted with the other stuff and also being lazy?
Yeah, very good question. Build it into a plan. So if you know there's certain things you've got to do or want to do, build those in as part of your schedule. Having a study space, not always possible, but having a space that is your little zone. Now that can be the kitchen table. It doesn't mean you have to have your own room with your own desk, with your little pots of pens that are set out nicely. But having a space that to you means, okay, this is study time. And then motivation is a really big thing. What are you doing revision for? Kind of rationalizing with yourself, what's that small term goal? What's the larger term goal? I am terrible at doing the little things that need doing before doing the work that needs doing. So I decided this morning that sweeping was more important than blood pressure data in a randomized controlled trial. It's probably not the best way around, but there is something to be said for if you get distracted by things, do a bit of it, and then you'll get bored of that, and then be like, you have to be strong with yourself. Sit down, get on with work.
Yeah, I hope that's helpful. We've got a question here from Mon. Now, what would you say, Matthew, is what does a typical A-star student look like, behave like, and how are they different to everyone else?
Yeah, there is no typical A-star student. How do you help yourself get towards an A-star? You use, well, firstly, how are they different in terms of the most practical kind of how do their question responses look different is a really, really, truly, solidly deep understanding of the material, being able to make connections. So not only knowing absolutely everything on the syllabus, but being able to link things together and make, let's take an essay-based subject, make really pertinent points. So if you're asked to give a critical response, don't just rabbit things out. Put a little bit of a plan together. Be concise. So waffle also doesn't, even if you can write 20 sentences on something, doesn't mean you'll get an A-star, because if it's not concise, not nicely put together, then is it deserved of one? No. If it's in a technical subject where you're trying to put information together and get to a final solution, then links and being able to do them quickly. And that's all about practice and exposure. Read around your subject. There are examples online of A-star responses, but copying those won't necessarily get an A-star anymore, because something that was really original when it was written doesn't mean it's original now. Penicillin was original when it was invented or discovered, and now everyone has it.
Yeah, I would super helpful. I would say, would you agree as well? It's probably useful as well if you look at the assessment objectives of your specific exams and just look at exactly how the grades are differentiated. I think
Absolutely.
Matthew's advice is more helpful for actually achieving those, but the information is actually out there for you to
Yeah.
look at.
I just want to really, really quickly address a comment that's been put in the host and panelist chat. In the majority of subjects, no.
Is this the most recent question from
Yes.
Amanda? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, my daughter is dyslexic. Will she be marked down for words that are spelled incorrectly?
Yeah. Yeah, she won't. The only subject where that might be the case is in languages or in English. I can't speak for either of those. Well, I can speak for languages because I have an A level in one of them, and you would be marked down there. As for English, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a long time since I've done it. But I would really encourage that conversation with Senko, special educational needs coordinator in school, to make sure the provisions are there in place in plenty of time, because that's the most comforting thing from my point of view, for other reasons, for my own arrangements.
Yeah, agree. And then I think just very last question here. I think there was a really important question from Sienna just now. So what, and I think this is probably relatable for lots of people here after the whole pandemic. It's been such a tough couple of years. Matthew, do you have any advice for what students can do to motivate themselves if they're feeling burnt out?
So avoidance is the wrong word, but taking a step away is really where I'm going with this. I'm going to go to the outdoors and hanging off the side of mountains again for a minute. And actually, the attitude in young people coming on their D&V expedition, it's completely shifted post-pandemic to actually, there's a lot of relief to be outdoors and not have been staring at a computer screen for 9 or 10 hours a day. That's a long time. So do give yourself breaks, reward yourself. Even if the outdoors is not something that's particularly your thing, as simple as going for a walk round the block, just take some time away. Don't try and plow through, because plowing through burnouts, the revision is not of good quality, but more importantly is, if you burn yourself out completely in revision, how are you going to show that when it comes to doing an exam? Make sure you be kind to yourself, put yourself in a position where you can show what you know. So I hope that helps. And I want to just reiterate that with the, remember, any revision, little bits of revision is good revision.
Yeah, and just to echo that as well, I feel it's easy when you're revising to get obsessed with the specific number of hours that you've revised, but an hour of revision when you're rested and fueled up and have been looking after yourself, you can achieve so much more and remember so much in that hour than an hour where you're burnt out and demotivated. You can just revise and really not be remembering things, but if you're well rested, your brain will work better. So as Matthew says, if you're feeling demotivated, burnt out, take some time away to recharge and look after yourself. Thank you so much, everyone who's come. And thank you so much, Matthew, for so much really helpful advice. I think it will be really, really helpful for everyone who's come. And yes, if you're still here, we'll be sending out the recording of this by email tomorrow. So if you've signed up for this event, we'll be sending it out to you.